All right, everyone. I'm excited to introduce my next guest. He has been entertaining us for decades, author of The Importance of Being Ernie, From My Three Sons to Mad Men, a Hollywood survivor tells all. Please welcome Ernie Douglas to the show, the one and the proverbial nerd. I love that. I love that so much. We're covering My Three Sons. We're covering a lot. We're going to cover a lot. Barry has done a lot. Welcome to the show. How you doing, sir?
Great. I'm great. Again, let's qualify that. I'm good. I'm all right.
You're good. All right. Well, I'm doing all the research. I read your book. I got plenty of questions to ask on that, but I know your career spans, from My Three Sons till now. And so it's interesting because how many other actors that were your age-ish during that time, besides maybe Kurt Russell, Ron Howard, maybe Jodie Foster, that are still actively acting to this day?
We're like the last dinosaurs roaming the earth. I think we could be extinct any day. Yeah, prior to My Three Sons, I was on a series called The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Did 16 episodes of that and 2 or 3 movies. So yeah, even prior to what people probably know best as My Three Sons, but it's a tough game to stay in it, and part of it is I love what I do, and I prepared myself well, I think, after My Three Sons, that went and worked in New York on Broadway and off Broadway and studied here in LA with some great teachers. So it wasn't just riding on the exhaust of my my three sons. It was a calculated effort on my part to try to remain relevant, and probably the same as for Ron and Kurt and Jody, who was a recurring character on My Three Sons. That's what it takes.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. So as I was kind of diving in, I read your book, so I got plenty of questions there. One of your more recent shows that I love is one of my favorite shows is the Orville. And
yeah.
And you were on one of the more popular episodes, only very briefly. You die right away.
I died, horrible death. You can't really see it, but the look on my face tells you everything.
Yes, it was one of the classic episodes of the Orville. Actually, one of the most watched that I think actually propelled it to the second seasons and all that. But of the men, and we can keep talking about a million of the amazing people you've worked with, but how was working with Seth MacFarlane and being on that show?
He's a very, very intelligent guy. Knew what he wanted. He was, had specific directions. A no nonsense type of dude on the set. He's known for being a funny man, but I in that environment and in that role as director and actor star of the showrunner, he was very serious about putting together a good sci-fi product.
That particular episode is really kind of cool the way it taps in with social media.
I'd have to watch it again. I'm getting up there in age, and it was probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. So yeah, I know people like it, but I couldn't tell you one thing about it other than I died.
No, I know you were you were in it for like 5 minutes, and then you're the beginning that kind of sets the whole.
Check cleared, so that's the important.
Yeah. So I love that. I love. I was watching a clip about when you worked with Brad Pitt, interview in a Super Bowl commercial for Heineken.
Yeah.
That David Fincher did.
David, that's where I met David, and David is a great director, one of the great Hollywood directors and of recent years. I was very fortunate that I got to do the thing with Brad, which he was super cool to work with, and then David wound up working in Zodiac, his film, and Social Network, his other film, and an Orville Redenbacher commercial that he directed too. So I'm very grateful that David seemed to include me in his projects.
That's awesome. All right, so can we go back in time? I know you gave a quick overview. I read your book, and a lot of you grew up, your dad, your parents, they owned theaters in the 30s and the 40s. So right. Like movies and entertainment was just kind of injected into your DNA.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you want to be an actor, or because I know Stanley kind of was leading it and kind of got discovered for Lassie, and then is it something that you were like, oh, I know your mom.
I kind of I noticed that he became suddenly very popular at the local pool, the public pool. Suddenly all the little girls thought he was a movie star. I'm sure that didn't escape my attention. And but again, I was 4 years old when I did my first job. So, and that was just by, it was a movie with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward called Rally Around the Flag Boys. And he had the official audition for playing one of their sons. And I tagged along with my mother, just took me to the casting office, and he went in and read. They came out and said, "We love your son. We're going to use him." And then they go, "Who's that guy?" And they go, "That, well, my mom said that's his brother." And he goes, "Well, we're casting the role of of another. There's two sons that the kids have. Does he act?" And I'd never done anything. Of course, my mother kind of gave me the elbow, and I just go, "Yeah, I can act." So yeah, that's how it started.
You said in your book your mom was really into it, but your dad, the acting thing, but your dad wasn't.
Yeah, no, he was just that. He was an intellectual, super bright guy. Was at NYU when he was 16 studying law. Yeah, I mean, he probably enjoyed it on some level, but he was had a company, his own business, and so my mother, the light bulb went off in her head, and this is the late 50s, mid to late 50s, and 1950s that is, and so it was something for her to, this world, the door opened right in front of her, unexpectedly. And so I'm sure she was fascinated by the studios and Hollywood and the money. The kids were going to make some money too. So yeah, she liked it to a degree. She got, once she was a very hyper body, kind of a free spirited woman. She realized very quickly being a mother on a sound stage with your kid is the most boring job in the world, and didn't fit her personality whatsoever. So we actually had a guardian that came in and stayed with us when we were doing My Three Sons, because the state requires that. And but yeah, my mother was the impetus that got us going. But very very quickly she realized it's a big bore just sitting on a set. So she bailed.
When you and your brother are working, and then there's the Cougan Law where they had to put a percentage away, is it, at least back then, I don't know how it is now, but like is it just understood then that the rest of the money goes to the family? And
Much, yeah. I mean, it's got to go somewhere, and obviously the agent takes their 10%. Before the Cougan Law, all the money that a child would be paid, according to Screen Actors Guild, you have to get a certain minimum, would just go to the parents, and a lot of times the kids never saw a penny of it. The Cougan Law tried to rectify that, and my parents, in fact, added more than what the minimum was. I think the minimum was at 5 or 10%. They upped it to about 15 or 20. So when I turned 18, I had a fair amount of money that at my disposal to kind of survive on, and that was a great thing. But then the bulk of the money went to just surviving, our family living a better quality of life, with Stan and I kind of, making a pretty good buck. Again, my parents kind of having had a little bit of exposure to the film world as an exhibitor with theaters, they were well versed in some of the other aspects of the production and the pitfalls, of I mean, we went back to public school, which we could have gone to a private professional school for showbiz kids, which was a good choice. I mean, it was difficult being famous and going to a middle school or high school where kids are notoriously mean, hey, it was a good lesson in life.
Was it mostly rough or 50-50 with the kids that loved the fact that they could see you on TV versus the ones that...
Middle school is rough. Middle school is pretty rough. Yeah, you develop a thick skin and tune out a lot of the things that are said about you as you're passing by or in the cafeteria. But by the time you got to high school, another level of maturity, not complete maturity, kicked in. There was always idiots somewhere. But, then I was able to make my own, enter my own group of friends, and that sort of insulated me from some of the crazier people that, just for the fun of it, want to pick on you because you're famous and on a TV show. Again, it was the best thing in the world, because I have a real honest connection to my peer group that matches all the other guys and girls of my age that had to go through the same experience. So to miss that, I think there would have been a big hole in my life as an adult.
When I talked to Stanley, he told a little bit of this story, but like when with the rally around the flag boys. So this was, well, you got fired at some point in the beginning. I think you talk about how you're in it for a minute being held upside down.
I'm still in it in the very first scene.
But what led to the firing, which was what led to you being diagnosed with
Yeah.
the eye condition, gave you like this unique look, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I guess that's what I've always referred to as a prototype nerd because I had big spectacles and I had buck teeth and my hair was kind of a pre-Beatles kind of bowl cut. So yes, but yeah, the incident you're talking about is that I was supposed to just look at a television set. Stan and I were sitting watching TV, and then Paul walks in, and he's our dad, and says, "Hi, boys." And director said, just ignore him. That's all you need to do. Sit and watch the TV and just ignore him. And then, of course, Paul reacts funny to our just ignoring him. But as it turned out, it looked like to the camera, my eye, when I wasn't wearing glasses at the time, my eyes were just turning or not looking at the TV, which in fact I was. But to the camera, to the director, it looked like I was just looking around the room with my eyes, which they were, had a mind of their own at that point. And eventually, he was getting upset, and because they had to repeatedly do our scene over, and then somebody realized something's wrong, and I was, they thought maybe I was having a seizure or something. So I was rushed from the set, from the studio to a hospital, and they said, no, he got an astigmatism. Maybe the little strain and stress of work was making it worse. Came back a day or so later with glasses. Said he needs to wear glasses, and the producers went, we didn't think Paul Newman's son has this glasses thing is not the right look. So anyway, yeah, I was fired. Welcome to Hollywood.
That sort of created the look that kind of serendipitously. I mean, it must have sucked to get fired, and like, especially when you
very well being put in a car and driven off a lot. I really, to this day, I was 4 years old. Big black Cadillac limousine. I guess I'm sure my mother was with me. I wasn't put in there by myself, but it felt like I was by myself and just being, slow drive through the studio and off into oblivion that, you're no longer, they didn't fire my brother, that was painfully aware. They just fired me. Yeah, again, it was one of those oddball twists of fate that it did create a different look that I was able to use. And I mean, Ozzie Nelson, who did, the Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, I think recognized that I had a unique look that certainly contrary to what the child actors were in that era. And I just looked probably more like the real life kids that were running around out there, not perfect little Hollywood children, but a little more like a little, ragamuffin tramp running around. And so yeah, that actually played into my hand and was a good thing.
Did it make for a couple rough family dinners?
Yeah. I was, you don't think about it. I mean, all of what I'm saying is in retrospect, I'm putting it all at the time. Okay, I wasn't that much fun anyway. I didn't have any grand desire to be a movie star, be Paul Newman's son. It was cool. It was fun. I was hanging out with my brother, and that was good. But it was okay. Other things seemed to come along pretty quickly, so it was no big deal.
You'd still got to hang out with Paul Newman a little bit, so that's
Paul was sweet. Paul was a method actor, and I didn't quite understand. Now I do, but he would come into our schoolhouse, and the teacher, I'm sure, gave him permission, and he would sit down and go over some of the math problems and work with us, kind of like doing homework kind of things. And I thought, I thought, well, okay, I don't care. He's the star of the movie, sitting here helping me like do times tables or whatever. And but then in retrospect, I went, oh, I get it. He's trying to forge a relationship with me that would parallel who he is in the movie. And I thought, oh, that's actually pretty cool. When I realized he was a sweet guy, but he had no real urgent need to come in and teach me the timetables, other than he wanted to forge a relationship with me. So when we're on screen, we'd have some credible reactions to each other.
That's really cool. You share a really nice story about how when they didn't figure out yet what was wrong with your eyes, how he was trying to help out, and because the director was being a little rough.
The director was an old-time screaming, maniac, a guy named Leo McCarey, who had directed the Marx Brothers in Duck Soup. That's how far back he went, to the 30s. So it was 20-some years later. And anyway, yeah, Paul kind of intervened when the director was really getting hot at me that I was wasting time and film. And he says, whoa, whoa, come on. You got the establishing shot. You see the boys, you see me come in from the front door. I ignore. He said, now all you need now is a close up of the boys, cut away. You see me, my reaction, and then you just want to see the boys looking at the TV and you hear my voice calling them. So he got in. They had a big old cabinet, 1950s style boxy big TV cabinet with nothing in it. But he said, somebody give me a puppet, or anyone got anything I can use to keep his. So he actually climbed into this big cabinet, and I think somebody found a puppet or something, and he thought, and he's like waving at me with it and doing this to try to keep my attention on there, because at that point nobody really realized what was going on, and I don't even think that worked. It's probably after that they realized we got to get this kid to a doctor right now. Something's happening. But yeah, it was very sweet. It was a really super guy.
That's awesome. You've worked with a million huge people. You drop so many names in the book. It's you worked with young Kurt Russell, so he would have been a big Disney. Was he a big Disney guy at that point? Like
he was doing a pilot at MGM, and I had a small role. The Adventures of Jamie McPherson. And I think Kurt's a few years older than me, but yes, that was he probably, I'm sure it's not on his resume, pretty early in his career too, and he was the star of it. But I don't think it was Disney yet. I think it was something we shot it at MGM. I remember that.
Got it. And then Mickey Rooney. You worked with Mickey Rooney early on.
Worked with Mickey, yeah. Dick Powell Theater. That was really early on.
With Ozzie and Harriet, again, there's a little pattern in the very beginning where it's like Stan did something and they notice you. So Ozzie and Harriet, he's on Ozzie and Harriet. Then you're noticed, and Ozzie kind of takes a liking to you, brings you into the show as well.
Yeah, well, and Stan was a recurring character on the Ozzie and Harriet show before My Three Sons. And Ozzie, again, my mother kind of being clever about it, would bring me to the set too. And Ozzie took a look at me, and by that time I was working, probably doing, the Dick Powell Theater and commercials or whatever. And so he took a liking to me, and actually he wanted to use me in an episode that Stan was in. I was too short to reach up to a chalkboard. It was a schoolroom scene, and I was supposed to write something on the blackboard. And anyway, he couldn't use me because he couldn't shoot from the back of the room over all the kids sitting there watching. I was too small. So, but anyway, when Stan got My Three Sons, he left and was exclusive to their company that was producing that. He kind of slid me into the little boy next door in the neighborhood, kind of hanging out and going to the malt shop. And I wound up doing 16 episodes of, playing that role. And first guest star billing I ever had was The Little House Guest, was an episode of the Ozzie and Harriet show. And it was, and of course, hanging out with Rick, who I knew was, a big music star, Rick Nelson. That was very cool. And David was great. It was a good experience.
Your mom must have been loving it at this point. It's like, mother of the Livingston boys.
At that point, she was still into it. I think she was getting a charge out of, meeting famous people and hanging out on the set. And we were being treated well, and she was too. It's when we both got on My Three Sons, and then it just settled into the daily routine of getting up at 6:30, getting at the studio by 7:30, 8, sitting there till 5 o'clock every day, 5 days a week. She said, no, this is, I've been there, done that. Nice. I met Fred MacMurray, I met William Frawley. It was very cool. Now I'm out of here. So, and it was good because our guardian was a really great lady, and she did the job well. And, my mother did whatever she did while we weren't at home.
I imagine it was less monotonous than most people wouldn't get on a show and be on that show you were 9 years, right? And Stanley was on it for 12 years. Most shows don't last that long. So there probably would have been a little more variety for other stage moms.
Probably. Yeah. There would have been, different sets, different people. But yeah, we were pretty locked into that show. And in fact, we were offered things during our hiatus. And my parents, I never really asked them too much about it, but we never did any other, episodics or movies while we were not, on hiatus from My Three Sons. I think they both wanted us to have, an experience of being in high school and junior high and not miss that. So I think, again, in retrospect, probably smart.
It sounds like it worked out very well. So now you're a known commodity. You're right. And then this leads to a movie with Jerry Lewis and Jackie Gleason. That was before?
Yeah. My Six Loves with Aaron Boy with Jerry Lewis. Those were all, I think, greased the wheels for me to get on My Three, which was a super big hit show at that point. But, the producers of My Three Sons knew I was on Ozzie and Harriet, and I had just done, 3 pretty big films for Paramount, and particularly My Six Loves with Debbie Reynolds and Cliff Robertson and David Jansen. It was a big deal. And so, I was asked to come in and read still for the role of Ernie Thompson at that time. But they knew me, and they knew, obviously Stan was on the show, so it was an easy fit.
Right. Sorry, I meant those came on the heels of
Yeah.
Ozzie and Harriet, and then
Right.
right. And then, but also there's a great story in the book about being on an episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show, being a friend of Richie, and some great advice that Carl Reiner gave you to get through a scene.
Well, we were not supposed to laugh. We were, Richie, the little boy, son of Dick Van Dyke, brings me and another kid into his bedroom to show show Dick, who's supposedly sleeping, in tiger pattern pajamas. And he pulls down the gun. We're not supposed to laugh, but we did. We kept cracking up. Yeah, I don't know why. It was like contagious. Finally, Carl Reiner came out. I forget what did he say? He said something like, you boys have to be professionals or something, no laughing. Anyway, he was not terribly harsh, but we were screwing the scene up and he wanted us to get it right. And I worked with him years later on a movie called Fatal Instinct, and he directed that, and he remembered that little incident, which was great. He was a good guy.
Dick Van Dyke Show, also another great show. So you've been on everything. It's you mentioned Debbie Reynolds in My Six Loves with Cliff Robertson also, and then your brother was working with Debbie Reynolds at the same time.
Yeah, she was, maybe the biggest female star in Hollywood at that point. And she was working with us on My Six Loves at Paramount. And then on weekends, she would fly out to Flagstaff, Arizona or Prescott, Arizona, where they were shooting this big Cinerama movie, How the West Was Won, with every movie star in the world was in that. And so, yeah, at the same time, she was doing two films, working with me here back in Hollywood, and then with my brother out on location.
That's so cool. And then I'm probably out of order here, but hanging out with Elvis must have been the coolest thing.
Again, that was by accident. While I was working on My Three Sons, you had time on your hands, as you'll do, when you're working. And I had a bicycle, and you could ride around the lot, and came upon this long black Cadillac idling outside of a sound stage. And of course, couldn't help but notice that. And I got off my bike, looked inside, the door was open, and peeked in there, and Elvis came up behind me and goes, "Oh, you like it, son?" I was like, "Oh gosh, oh my God, it's Elvis!" And anyway, then they were bringing it over to him from Chuck Barris, I guess, was the customizer of cars back in the day. And anyway, they had tricked it out for Elvis, and they were bringing it over to show him. And anyway, he hopped in, said, I'm going for a ride. Yeah, it only dawned on me not too long ago, which is weird because it might sound creepy these days to some people that an adult, asking a little kid to go for a ride with him. But he was a big fan of the Ozzie and Harriet show. I'm sure he recognized me from that. It didn't dawn on me till like recently. Going, oh yeah, I think Sam Nelson, Rick's son, brought that to my attention. We're friends, and he said, yeah, Elvis loved Rick and he loved the Ozzie and Harriet show. I'm sure he knew who you were. And, as a fellow actor, he invited me to go for a little 5-minute spin around the lot and, flicking all the buttons and whistles and turning on the TV and watching Popeye with him, that kind of stuff. And, that was it. So it was fairly quick, kind of, awkwardly weird, just suddenly you're with Elvis. But he was great. He was not creepy or weird or anything. He was just a, young guy who was, enjoying himself too and loved his new Cadillac, his new toy.
So years later, having this revelation, did you have a moment where you're like, oh my God, Elvis knew who I was?
Yeah, that's exactly. I never dawned on me. Honest to God, I was going, he knew I was an actor, because I was on the studio and I maybe even asked me, and I said, I'm working on this movie. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't like some kid off the playground. He just pulled up and asked him to get into the car with him. He knew I was an actor and at Paramount. And so, but again, I did make the connection that he probably knew me pretty well from that show because I had done 16 episodes by that time probably. And so, and he, was just a fan, and maybe he was a fan of me. I don't know, but it never came up. But I finally put two and two together, and I think that's probably what it was.
He must have been a fan. He wouldn't have just invited anyone into his Barris car.
Exactly. That makes more sense to me now too.
Yeah. And Barris, by the way, just for everyone listening, he's the guy that did the Batmobile, Batman 66, the Monkey Mobile, I think the Munsters car. This guy did not mess around. So this must have been a cool car.
It was more furry carpeting and leather and gold trim cabinetry and a TV, which this is probably early 60s. And to see a TV in a car, because most TVs were the size of refrigerators back in that era. And he had a nice little portable TV installed in a cabinet. And that was like the future. That was like the Jetsons or something, that a TV in a car, that blew my mind that he could actually sit there and watch TV in it. Yeah, no, it was pretty cool.
That is really cool. Before we dive into My Three Sons, one random thing from the book that I just thought was really cool that I wanted to mention was that you live next door to Houdini, or at least Houdini
The
didn't live
ruins.
there anymore, but like
Yeah.
his house. That's just cool in itself.
Very cool. It was creepy, because we had a house in Laurel Canyon right next to Houdini's estate, which had burned, and Houdini was long gone, but still it felt ghostly and creepy. And, that was the thing. If your kids in that, were 10, 12, 13 years old, and you go in there and, root around the ruins and stuff, it was very creepy, but fun.
Okay, so My Three Sons, so you mentioned you auditioned, they brought you in. You didn't have to audition against anyone else. They just
I don't think they saw anyone else. Maybe they did. They didn't schedule them. It wasn't like a room full of, potential Ernie sitting there. It was me. And yes, I went in and read for Don Fedderson, who was the creator of Sons, and another guy named Gene Reynolds, who was a child actor himself. But he was our director for My Three Sons. And I, read, and I think they, the thing was is they told me to wait in the outer office after I read, and I thought, oh, we were actually about to leave to go to Palm Springs for just a, little weekend getaway. And then 5, 10, 15 minutes went by, and we're sitting there going, what's happening? And eventually Don Fedderson came out of his his office, and he was holding some keys, and he goes, well, I know you guys are away. I'm sorry to keep I couldn't find the keys to my place in Palm Springs, but now Barry's going to be part of the show, and I want you to feel, stay at my place while you're down there. So it was a nice way to end that long wait. I got the job, and we got to stay at the boss's mansion down in Palm Springs.
that is amazing. So it's interesting. Like when I'm looking at My Three Sons, and I mean this in the most loving way possible. You know that meme where the guy's like, like this, and it's like all the papers are on the wall, and it's like he's trying to, everything doing this. Like My Three Sons changed so much over 12 years. I was trying to like map out everything, like when you become adopted, and then Tina joins, and William leaves, and William joins. Bub leaves, Uncle Charlie. Like it's amazing how
Yeah.
when one person left, and all the transitions, and how they kept the show going and popular for as long as they did. It's absolutely incredible.
No, to have major characters like William Frawley, pass away and leave, and then another guy, William Demers, come in and take his spot, and then Tim Considine, who was the original son, decided he didn't want to do the show anymore, so he left. So that was, that he was a very popular player on that show. Yeah, I mean, it did go through a lot of trends. Don Grady event. I don't think Don, who played Robbie, I don't think he was in the final year of the show. Chip had moved out with Polly. So the only ones left at home were like me, Uncle Charlie, and Dodie. Yeah, the show was still pretty popular. I think it was still a top 20 show when it was canceled in, 72.
It's amazing. It was 380 episodes, which in 12 seasons, which in today's numbers would be 47 seasons.
They do a season is 10 episodes. So if you did 12, you have 120 episodes at most. Nobody does 12 seasons anymore. 5, 6 is a long run.
Okay, so the show was based around Fred MacMurray, who is at this point one of the biggest movie stars around, right? So it's very uncommon for a movie person so everything was really based around him, the McMurray method. I started watching the show, trying to like see how that like it's hard to notice. I mean, you guys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it was a smooth machine. They had it all figured out, and the McMurray method was day one of the starting a season of episode shooting. You would just shoot everything with Fred MacMurray. Every scene, he's not in every scene in every episode, so they would skip those and just shoot maybe 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 episodes, working out of just everyone that had a scene with Fred in it and shoot those and just his close-ups. And then, Fred would leave after about 6, 7 weeks and go on vacation, or I don't know if he even did any other films while he was doing that, but he would just disappear. And then we would go back and do all of our matching close-ups that they skipped 2, 3 months earlier, or, and scenes that Fred wasn't in. And then the editors had to, the job of putting it all together, making it make sense.
Have you watched the series?
It just came out on Amazon Prime. I never watched it. Yeah, okay. I mean, I wasn't trying to search it out. If it was on, I'd go, oh, yeah, okay, I'll watch it. But it did come out on Amazon Prime. I'm not sure if it's still there, but not long ago. And I thought, wow, that's one of the major channels now. I did watch one episode. I think I was still a friend next door. And it was weird, too, because when I was doing the show, nobody even told me, that I'm adopted, that I was a foster child. And it was before I joined the Douglas family, and Tim Considine was still there as a son. My parents came into that episode because the story had something like Ernie had some treasure map, and he and Chip wander off into the forest and get lost. And so, but the parents come into it, and they were just so mean. They were just, Ernie's parents were just, and they kept going, he's a little demon. He's going to get a real talking to and a good spanking I was like, man, apparently Ernie Thompson's parents were quite abusive. It was funny because I'm going, I didn't know. They didn't made no mention of it to me and even in that episode, they just went, oh, it's his parents. So conveniently, when I was going to be adopted into the show, they explained it that they were my foster parents and they were leaving the country. And so the Douglas family adopted me. But I got a laugh out of that going, man, they really didn't like me. They didn't like Ernie at all, my real parents.
I think I was reading that when you were Chip's friend, you were the same age.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
you got adopted, they made you younger.
Yeah, we were in the same schoolroom, a couple episodes we were in class together. Pretty close in age, I guess. I don't know, we're 3 years apart in real life.
It was just one of those ways that, like, when you look back, the reason I brought up not watching it is it never occurred to me that people didn't watch their own shows. And I think when I was talking to Stanley, he's like, I've never seen it. And I was like, I think he said something like that. And I was like, but you guys should do a first time watch. Like like the guys from Full House are doing that. Like that would be great.
I didn't want to intrude in my family. I've got 2 kids who are grown now. What am I like? Come on, watch Daddy, and who need being a child of a parent is hard enough. Being the child of a parent that you're going, I'm really famous. See, who needed that? Yeah, I mean, I intentionally, I made no big deal of it, and I didn't want to force them to watch it, and I didn't want to watch it. So yeah, that was probably the main reason that it wasn't on in our house 24/7. I just found that's silly. It's just not a good thing.
Is it hard to even remember specific episodes if someone were to describe them to you because you would have filmed it in like possibly 15 different times, days?
Again, there are episodes that stand out. The one with the lion that got loose and came to the Douglas house. That was an unusual episode, but for the most part, I'm here and there I kind of recall certain episodes, but they were pretty much all the same, really.
I read that the Brady Bunch took some of those scripts and then used some of those later on. But
I think we recycled our scripts, from the first 1960, and by the time you got around to 1970, 71, Doty would be having the same problem that Chip had in 1960 or whatever. So yeah, they did that.
So going out of order for a second, like you were on the Lucy show, or you worked with Lucille Ball, which I thought was amazing and so cool. And then you got to work with William Frawley. Did he, from the book, he just outwardly would slam Vivian Vance? They didn't get along at all.
No, that's true. He was not a fan of Vivian, and she didn't like him that much. There was no love lost between those two. So
you guys, like being younger on the actual show, was the transition from William Frawley to William Demarest, was that difficult? Like to all of a sudden be working with
everybody loved Frawley. And I got to work with him, I guess, a season, maybe 2 seasons or whatever. So, he was probably a lot closer to my brother Stan than he was to me, but he was fun and, loved to curse and swear and drink, and and as kids, you think that's the funniest thing in the world when something would happen, he'd lose it and start cursing. And then Demarest came in, and yeah, it was he was a pro. We got used to a different version of Frawley because he was somewhat a tough guy from the 30s, and that's what they both played in films forever. And but yeah, he was a little more gruffer and a little more cranky or something. I don't know what the difference. I mean, Frawley loved to drink, so Frawley was always had two or three good shots of Cutty Sark in him down it. And no matter what time of day, which took the edge off. I think Bill Demarest was a recovering alcoholic for the rest of his life, which his disposition was a little grumpier, but he was still a sweet guy. He was great.
Did the show when they would make major changes, was it cool for you guys as the cast, like when they brought Tina Cole on, because they changed the whole show up a bit, right, with her and then the triplets and like all that? Did that sort of
it was another thing, but it was just another. We loved Tina. She was a vivacious, fun person. So that part of it made it very easy for her to be included in our little tight-knit cast. So yeah, I mean, there was no big issues that came along there, and we kind of understood. Yeah, it's kind of good. Like Stan was at the age where, when he got married, it gone great. It's kind of appropriate, that I should be at least in a serious relationship with a woman, that I'm not like hanging out with Ernie and I'm 20 years old and sitting in my room with Ernie still. That'd be stupid. So, all those things seem to be good choices, and they were good people too to work with.
When the show ended, got a little bummer in the book how you describe like it ending with it not being really a lot of fanfare and Fred kind of going, hey,
There was I don't know, the last, they would have a wrap party at the end of the year, and we all kind of, we're getting to a point where we saw the end was there near. I mean, it would have been doing it just for the money for another season, honestly. And I was becoming an adult. I was close to 18, if not 18 already, and and I had my eye on doing other things, and I think everybody was. And Fred probably just went, I just want to golf. I don't want to do this anymore at all. So we all hit the wall is a little rough, but we all were probably somewhat relieved that it's done. We did our thing. It was a big hit. Times were changing dramatically. That was probably the most troubling thing at all, is that All in the Family had come out and just revised everything you knew about sitcoms. And we just felt like so from a different time zone. And they were talking about abortion and gun rights and whatever, and we were still talking about Uncle Charlie's lasagna recipe or something, and it's kind of silly. I really kind of going as an adult, I'm not really thrilled to be part of this anymore. If that's all we can do in this time, and people, who were alive in the early 70s will know it was a transitional time in the world, and we were reflective of another era.
Were you ready to walk away? I mean, like at some point, right? I mean, like I remember like talking to other folks, they're like John Provost was just ready to go, or like,
I think we all were. Like I said, I think, for different reasons.
Yeah.
I think Fred had, been a star for 40 some years. He wasn't getting any, although it's funny because he was probably no more than 61 or 2, which is by today's standards not that old. Brad Pitt is 60 something now. It still looks great. But yeah, he get up and do these hours and learn all this stuff anymore. And I've done it for 12 years, and it's time. 12 years is a long run, and he probably, like all of us, realized that the times on television and the world had passed us by.
I mean, it's just an amazing body of work overall. Were you and Stanley, were you both like, all right, we're going to continue to be actors? I mean, like, was that like your goal? Like, okay, now, because you hadn't even looked for work in 12 years, 9 years, right?
No, I didn't have, I was unemployed suddenly after that long, 8, 9 year stretch. So, but, I mean, I was aware of what was happening in films, and films were the greatest, some people think the best era in films were in the 70s. So, all Jack Nicholson and Five Easy Pieces and Easy Rider and The Graduate. And, we all sensed that there was a whole new world of reality that was being portrayed, and going, I'd like to be part of that. I mean, I want to be in that world, not this old fashioned world that had its day. And great, but it's time to move on. So yeah, I was very interested and again, my parents were very wise in saying, if you're going to do it, you really got to go and study and be part of, go to acting school, go to New York, which I did, and try to transition, into a craft and really understand, if you want to succeed, you got to work at it. And some actors felt that they just were owed a career after their big hit shows. I didn't have that. I mean, I went, good, I got that. It's great. No, I want to put that over in the side here. I never expected or anticipated a free ride. If, some actors went, well, I don't read anymore. Well, I was like, really? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem inappropriate to me to be asked to come in and read for a role. I mean, I was reading for, big films. So what was the Jack Nicholson film he did with Randy Quaid, Last Detail? I remember going to reading for Hal Ashby, who did, other big films of that era. I would get a shot at going read for a lot of Lee Marvin movies, things like that, and which were different realities. So, but my parents were wisely said, find a good acting school, find, if that's what you're going to do, and, study, become a real professional actor. You can't just rely on your cuteness anymore, which I was I didn't have that much cuteness to start with. So, it was a good advice.
Oh, come on. You're adorable.
In a weird way, yes. In my own unique way, yes, I carved out my own adorableness.
So after you do You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and then you're on Sons and Daughters. Was that sort of just like kind of a Happy Days-ish drama? And then it was...
Well, honestly, they were produced at the same time, different concepts. The American Graffiti came out, and suddenly everyone was 1950s crazy. So Sons and Daughters was a TV series, but it was a drama for CBS, and it was focusing on young kids in high school in the 50s, and I was one of them. And yeah, but it was a very, very dramatic, very kind of, what were the big shows, the era, Roots, Rich Man, Poor Man, these are the big miniseries of the day, although this was a weekly show. So Falcon Crest, whatever, we were kind of falling into that soap opera-y. And then at the same time, they produced Happy Days, and Happy Days was anything but that. It was light and frothy in half an hour, and no real issues were, troubling anybody and the public took to that, they loved that. And our show, it was critically well received, but not a big hit with the audiences.
Well, you worked with Richard Donner.
Yeah, Dick Donner, yeah, great director. He was still doing television at that time, but then he went on to do the first Superman movie with Chris Reeves and The Omen, and he became a very prominent film director. Yeah, it was good. There was good people involved with Sons and Daughters.
Yeah, he's amazing. And then your friend Roddy McDowall told you to go to New York.
Yeah.
Had he done Planet of the Apes yet at this point?
I think so. I think that was late 60s maybe, and I did a movie called The Elevator with a bevy of major stars of years past: Myrna Loy, Teresa Wright, Roddy McDowall, and then there was some new guys: Don Stroud and James Ferrantino and Carol Lindley and me. I asked Roddy, because Roddy was a very famous child actor in his day, and he was, probably in his 50s by then. I said, "What did you do?" And he said, "I went to New York. I went to New York and learned about life, learned about acting." Okay, and I kind of took that advice and did that.
And then you landed The Skin of Our Teeth, and then and then when that ended, I want to jump to the next part. Now, this is from your book. This is the cocaine part of the story. Now, I mean, before reading it in your book, anytime, like if someone were to say, "Oh, the child actors that, went into drugs," I don't know that your name ever came up. I mean, so
with that, I wasn't into that much, and I never, if you can do such a thing as any kind of drug responsibly, I did. What can I say? I'm not going to lie. It was the 70s. If you were there, you know what I'm talking about in Hollywood. So yeah, it was a time of experimentation and weed and other things that were floating around. And in my personal peer group, that guys that weren't in the business, and certainly some of the people that were. Yeah, it was just a phase. What can I say? I mean, but again, I never went out, robbed any video stores or hurt anybody or did anything other than in certain situations party like everybody else was partying in my world.
All right. And then you went through a kind of a lull in the career you talk about in your book. Like for 8 years, you struggled to, and like you did some dinner theater, and then you talk about being cast in High School USA.
Yeah, well, High School USA, I don't know. I think the thing that turned around for me to really start the adult phase of my was being a recurring character on Doogie Howser, because I was, I was the doctor that had all the answers, and Doogie was the young dude, clueless and asking the dumb questions. So, and my look had somewhat changed, that I'd lost, considerable amount of hair. So I looked like a doctor. I looked like a lawyer suddenly, or an accountant. And yeah, that was the start in my mind of an uptick in doing some more mature roles in different projects. And and then prior to that, I had a lovely time. Stan and I did dinner theater, and I love doing live theater, and I still do. So yeah, I mean, it was not just sitting around twiddling my thumbs for 8 years. I mean, I was working. I was traveling to Kansas City and St. Louis and Salt Lake City, and working numerous different plays around the country. So might have not been on a hit TV series, but for me, I was very happy.
You did Masters of the Universe. You mentioned that. That's a nice pop culture moment. And
Back,
then,
yeah, that's having a research. I think they're going to do a new version of that. I don't know. I probably won't be part of it, but yeah, that was lovely to get in a major film again, and that was again, came out and did moderately well. Who knows why it didn't do better, but nonetheless, it was, for me, fun to be in part of a big project.
I think you said it right in your book. It was just a timing thing. I think it was just, by the time it came out, it probably just missed the craze of
Yeah.
Masters of the Universe, because there
Yeah,
was.
and Skeletor, that whole world, I think, had peaked maybe a year before, and they were a little late to the party, and people had moved on. Star Wars or whatever, was the rage. They're going to try to bring him back. I've read that they're doing a He-Man Masters of the Universe party. So
Yeah, they're doing a movie. I think Kevin Smith just did a cartoon series for Netflix, or one of them.
yeah, good luck. We'll see.
We talked about Elvis knowing who you were, but then you tell a great story of Steven Spielberg knowing who you were.
Yeah, I was actually doing some ADR, which is post-production work, adding voices to a film called The Stuntman with Peter O'Toole and my really great friend Steve Railsback. And anyway, I was at Warner Brothers. It was late at night while we were working, but I took a walk and ran into a guy who said, "Hey, Ray, remember me?" And bearded white guy. I said, "Nah, not really." He goes, I worked on the Ozzie and Harriet show with you." He says, I used to be the focus puller. Back in those days, they had a guy who operated the camera, the operator, and a guy who pulled focus. If somebody walked around, he would change the focus from the camera. And I said, "Oh, great. What are you doing now?" He goes, "Well, I'm working on this film here. I'm cinematographer now," which is like, that's the top tier of the photography of a project, the director of photography, cinematography. And he says, "Come on, I wanted you to meet somebody." I was like, "Okay." So it turned out to be Steven Spielberg, and he was on the lot shooting 1941, which is probably one of his only flops. Didn't do well, but he had just done Jaws before that, so he was the premier hotshot director in Hollywood. Steven was blown away. Ernie, "Oh man, oh my gosh, I grew up watching your show. Oh, come here, sit here. Here, I want you to meet John Belushi. Here's Amy Irving. This is John's wife. Sit next to me." Great, so that was a lovely little encounter. Didn't lead to a job, but I thought, oh well, I met the great man, and he was very nice.
Another story you talk about where you did meet someone that did lead to a job was when you chose to do Dickie Roberts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then Adam Sandler was like, I guess, produced the movie. And
Adam, yeah, he's produced so many films of his ex-partners from Saturday Night Live. And yeah, Dickie Roberts was just a money gig. Literally, he came in with a bunch of other famous child actors, and in the end, they did a cameo scene where we all sang some song, and whatever. But I was on the lot over at Sony. I think I was shooting something. What was that? It was another TV show that I did. Actually, Emilio Estevez was the director of it. Can't think of the name of it. But anyway, I was on the lot over at Sony. But I knew Adam had produced Dickie Roberts. His offices were on the Sony lot, so I thought, walk over, say hi if I can. I've never met him before. Yeah, go to his office. Yeah, he wasn't there. It was lunchtime. came out, and then suddenly he sped up in his golf cart, covered in sweat, had just been playing basketball with his pals. Well, okay, here we go. Let's see how this works. And I said, hey, Adam, I just want to thank you. I was in Dickie Roberts. I know you produced that. And I was on the show, My Three Sons. Oh, no, man. Oh, yeah, oh, sure. Oh, I love that show. Oh, we watched that. The whole family would get together and watch it. And, Thursday night. I was like, well, that's cool, man. And, but, hey, man, I'd love to be in one of your movies. Oh, sure. I'll put you in my movies. Yeah. And no problem. So, from that point on, I would audition and I would get a call from my agent to go read for a new Adam Sandler movie. I was like, well, that doesn't happen because my agent is making that happen. It happened because Adam remembered and made the casting people reach out. So I did that 2 or 3 times. I mean, The Longest Yard, I didn't get it, 1 or 2 others. Then finally, You Don't Mess with the Zohan came around. I was called to come in and read again. And in this case, I moved up, and they said, you don't have the role yet, but you've been invited to a table read at Sony. I was like, oh, wow, that sounds tricky. They want you to read for this role here, but you don't have the part yet. I was like, well, you're still auditioning then, even though they go, don't worry about it. You haven't got the role, so you're still auditioning. Anyway, so I'm there and, all the stars are kind of in the big table and all the executives, and then feel a tap on my shoulder. And it's Adam. He goes, see, I told you I'd get you something good. Oh, man, you got to be kidding me. This is too much. Thank you so much, man. And, and from that point, I walked out and looked over at Adam, and he goes like that. I'm going, well, I guess I'm in. And so, that's how it works.
Is there anyone else in the industry that would, like Adam Sandler, that would do that?
No, Adam is the best. Adam is without a doubt one of the most beloved, and for a reason, because he stands by his friends and he stands by his word, and he's extremely talented. Yes, he's truly one of the great guys in Hollywood.
That is I love that story. So, I mean, you've been in like so much. I mean, like 2.5 Men, Mad Men, Zodiac, the movie with David Fincher we talked about, and The Social Network. I love that movie. That's such a great movie.
It's a fantastic movie.
I mean, like, is there, of all the things you've done, and there's a million, Lie to Me, Desperate Housewives, I'm just scanning real fast, Horrible Bosses, I'm skipping a lot, but Argo, that's a great movie. Like, how is Ben Affleck as a director? Because that's what everyone talks about, like just how amazing.
He was tricky with me. I don't know why. Sometimes I think people want to put me through my paces just because whatever. But he, the scene, and then they wound up cutting the scene that I'm in it, but they wound up really, really cutting that scene a lot. Not because of me, but he really, really wanted me to, he wants you to, do, I'm forgetting what the direction, but he kept coming up to me and going, I try it like this. And I'm going, okay, and we did it. And finally, I remember walking out, and Bryan Cranston, who was in the scene off camera, and saw this 6, 7, 8 takes, whatever it was. Finally comes up and he goes, any one of those was great. Any one of those takes was perfect. Okay, well, that's good to hear. I appreciate it. I respect your word. You're really cool. That's very nice of you to say. But yeah, I don't know. He was clearly he was a really, understood the film, knew what he wanted. It's a great movie. Won Best Picture.
Yeah, it's a wonderful film. Like you were in 2 films in the same year that like were up for Best Picture, weren't you? That and was it Social Network the same?
Social Network might have been. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That was a good year.
That was a good year for Barry. Having been in the industry as long as you have and worked on like Hot in Cleveland with Betty White. I mean, there's just like a million things, like lessons in chemistry. I mean, you're General Hospital. You're still working actively to this day. Bosch. Yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah. Titus, yeah, see, and again, that was Titus. I'm sitting next to Titus in Argo in our scene, and we kind of chit chat as actors do during takes, between takes. You're kind of, and everywhere I went, Titus was. I thought, well, this is kind of weird. I'd be a craft service. He'd come up, hey, what's going on? At lunchtime, I remember I got on they had it somewhere away from the stage, and I got on a golf cart. They were going to ride you over, and Titus hops on next to me. I'm going, hey, oh, hi, man. And then as we're driving, I saw the producers of 2.5 Men, which I had reached. And I told the driver, I said, stop. I just want to get off and say hi to these people. And so Titus comes to me. I'm going, oh, okay, well, here's Chuck Lorre, Titus, Chuck, good to see you. And but So when Bosch came around, somebody said to me, they heard about this role. They said, you should reach out to Titus because he's the producer of one of the producers of Bosch. And then, it's okay, and it sent him a note, maybe through Facebook even. And I just, and he immediately go, oh, great idea. Oh yeah, man, I'm on it. I'm on it. You're in, you're in. And, he said, I'm calling casting right now. A day or two, three went by. He got back to me. He goes, did you hear from casting? And I said, no, no, not yet. And he goes, okay, stand by, and then of course, I finally did hear from casting and I went in and read and, got the role, but it's good. It's good to have friends. Definitely.
That's awesome. Actually, what is the main difference that you've seen in terms of how things were done back then versus when you go onto a set now?
Well, they were shooting in film mainly back in the day. Digital, you can just do endless takes if you want. But the actual process for me as the actor is the same. I mean, you come in the morning, you have your donut and coffee and go to your room and get in your wardrobe and get in makeup. And then that hasn't changed. You if you're lucky, you have maybe a little rehearsal time with your fellow actors in the scene. And then eventually you just go into the set and you take your place and they film it. And that's the way it works, and I don't think that part of it has changed much. That's just acting, and you got to have another person across from you, and you're playing with that person in the scene, and that's what they're filming. So it doesn't really matter if it's on digitally captured or on film, but the digital is cheaper because they don't have to. Film is expensive, and you do 12 takes on film, that costs money. 12 takes of something digitally is just reset and you do it again. But yeah, it's again, I don't see much difference. I don't. Probably behind the scenes, people have to deal with the product a little differently, but not for the actor, I don't think.
Maybe filming an entire episode in 1 week versus
That was the way they always did. Our show was exception to the rule. So yeah, that was different.
So, of all the things we talked about, what are the things that is there one or two things that we didn't talk about that you're like, all right, everyone, these are some key Barry Livingston roles that you should check out?
Well, Mrs. Davis was really fun. I did that last, I guess it came out last year on Peacock, and it was fun because I actually had to do it in the nude, which was a new experience. I had to deal with all of the new cancel culture and the intimacy coordinator. That's a new function in film, that there's a person specific to make sure you're not being taken advantage of, you're feeling comfortable, that there are not issues that you have to bring up to get them resolved. Just conversations like, I'm nude, but I'm wearing a piece that covers up the important parts. And but having a conversation with somebody going, now, Andy, would you like some sort of unit to just sticks on, or something that we can tie on? I'm going, I'm just almost laughing, going, I, I don't know. Never had these conversations with a stranger before. I don't know, whatever. As long as it doesn't come off, that's all I care about, right? So anyway, it was fun. It was a really fun scene. It's a great scene actually, with Betty Gilpin, who's she's the star of that show, and but to do that was an unusual thing that would have never been done in the past. So that was fun, and I just had a great experience doing a play, Cyrano de Bergerac, great classic play at the legendary historic Pasadena Playhouse. I don't know where you are or if you're aware of Pasadena Playhouse, but it's
Michigan, but yes, I'm aware.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So there you go. You're in Michigan, but you've heard of the Pasadena Playhouse. It's a incredibly historic. Can't countless people have major stars have done productions there over the years, and so it was a bucket list for me to get to do, this classic play and do that in such a historic venue. It was really satisfying and great to be in such a beautiful production. It was standing ovations every performance. I wasn't Cyrano. I was, played a few roles in it actually, but still, it was an experience that I ranks very high on my list of, and it's most probably the most recent one that I did on stage. So it's fresh in my mind. And it, fresh in my mind is a big thing these days. A lot of stale things in my mind, Tim, but I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, that was fun. Guess you can't see it, but probably gonna look up pictures if you Google it.
I will Google it right when we stop talking. If you could do anything right now, like pick your next big project. Do you love doing theater, or would that be your passion? Could you ride out the rest of your career doing theater? Would you love to be the dad in a new sitcom? I'm like, what would
Not to be a hog, but I'd like to do it all, but I'd like to do my dream job at this point would be a recurring role, a really nice recurring role on a 3-camera sitcom series, because you don't have to be there every day, you don't have to be there every week. You can come in once every other week, 2 times a month, 3 times a month, whatever. And 3-camera work is a lot of, much like theater, that you do it in front of a live audience, and the hours are regular. I mean, this is all the nuts and bolts of being an actor, but it's much more doable in terms of having a livable life, as opposed to flying off to wherever, Des Moines, Iowa in the winter, and it's 12 degrees below zero, and you're there at 4 in the morning and leaving at 9 o'clock at night. I mean, I would do that. I like that, but the other is a little more, for my energy level and everything. That would, to answer your question, that would be my dream job at this point.
love it, love it. Barry, thanks for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing all the stories, everything. It was awesome.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, appreciate it. See you later.